Okay. Meg is going to introduce David Heap.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. As a Canadian Boat to Gaza co-founder and volunteer with the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, David Heap is uniquely positioned to discuss the Palestinian struggle, not just for statehood, but for survival against the genocidal onslaught of the Israeli occupation forces. This struggle is reflected in much of the long-standing work of the Council of Canadians. It forms part of the work for People, Planet, and Democracy here in the northern part of Turtle Island. Good friends, it is my great pleasure to introduce David Heap.
Why is our course The Conscience of Humanity is, first of all, it's the title from a blog post that I wrote in October. It could have been true at any time. It happened to be published on the day when a boat named Conscience was attacked by the Israeli occupation forces military, a boat that included on board 6 Canadians. But the slogan is one we've used for many years. Beginning with our history, I'll go forward a little bit. So people have been sailing to Gaza against the blockade since 2008. This history is all on the back of this T-shirt. I can't present with my back to you, so it's very bad teaching form. So we have the reproduction of it here, and it's constantly being updated. So in fact, it's a little bit more complete here than it is here, but it's still being updated. But the thing that isn't on the T-shirt is an international one. This one came from Istanbul. People are producing them in the States and in different places. The thing that we want to add here is that starting in 2010, this chapter of the Council of Canadians began moving towards an endorsement, and in 2011, the chapter endorsed the Canadian Boat to Gaza and the Freedom Flotilla against the blockade of Gaza, and that was in the spring of the year. In the fall of the year, at the annual general meeting of the Council of Canadians nationally, it unanimously endorsed those two campaigns, the Canadian Boat to Gaza and the Flotilla against the blockade, which were, I'm going to say, less well known at the time than they are now, and a little bit surprising for the Council of Canadians, which was primarily known since the 1980s for trade justice and environmental justice. That is to say, defending Canadian resources and Canadian jobs against extractivism and the push for deregulated trade with our neighbor to the south in particular. So when people thought of the Council of Canadians, they mainly thought of those two things: defending water and other resources, and defending against free trade and deregulated commerce. It was a little bit surprising in that case, but I think for them to see the Council of Canadians endorsing this particular campaign, I think that you have to keep in mind, at that time our national chair for many years was Maud Barlow. Some of you may remember Maud Barlow as a water defender, as someone who was appointed to the UN as a special advisor to the Secretary General of the UN on water. And Maud simply said, water is a human right. Water is also a human right for Palestinians in Gaza. And it's this, if you like, very obvious, but very obvious and intuitive, but not obvious to everybody, realization that meant that we could very easily move from being the Council of Canadians on those issues that I mentioned before to the Council of Canadians also endorsing the Boat to Gaza and the Freedom Flotilla against the blockade. And now I've completely lost. Okay, this will still work this way. No, it won't work this way. So I'll actually, from the top of the slide, people began sailing against the blockade successfully in 2008. That is to say, it's important to keep in mind that boats were able to reach and leave Gaza several times in 2008. It was just, the occupation military knew about it, they knew what they were doing, they monitored them, but they didn't attack them. It was only at the end of 2008, with the caste-led aggression against Palestinians in Gaza, that the occupation began to interdict and then attack and then steal these boats. So in 2009, people did other things. Some people from London were involved with, and this is where I'm going to try to get the other photo here. Yeah, we're involved with the Freedom March, the Gaza Freedom March. You may recognize Wendy Goldsmith and myself in the bottom. We met the full force of the Mubarak regime in Egypt, who said, no, you're not marching to Gaza. So we sat in Tahrir Square in 2009, a year before, 2009-10, the year before the Egyptians did it properly. Another notable thing about that trip was we met other people, other internationalists. So Wendy led a group of several hundred people into Tahrir Square, and we met people from Europe and Africa, South America and Asia, other North Americans who were interested and committed to breaking the blockade. Some of them later told us about the Freedom Flotilla, which we hadn't been aware of up until then, and the fact that boats were sailing, and the fact that in 2010, a large group of boats, the first Freedom Flotilla, was going to sail. The other memorable thing for me is when we were trying to figure out how to do this and move into the Tahrir Square in a very confusing situation in Cairo. Under Mubarak's regime, it was illegal for more than five people to meet together. I remember a young South African trade unionist say to us, and she was younger than us, she was a representative of COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, and she said, comrades, it doesn't matter what we do this week or this month. What matters is how many decades we're going to stand with Palestine, because that's how long she will need us. Palestine will need us. So we understood it in that sense, those of us who heard her words. Coming from a South African whose people had defeated apartheid, that this was and is a struggle for a long haul. Because we had made contacts with the Freedom Flotilla folks, we were able to go after that to found the Canadian Boat to Gaza. So when the Mavi Marmara and the other boats in 2010 were attacked in May, and 10 people were killed by Israeli occupation commandos, people were in the streets across Canada, some of the same people, asking us when, not if, but when there would be a Canadian Boat to Gaza. So we took that, those of us who had been involved in the Freedom March, took that to mean we had to organize a Canadian Boat to Gaza. None of us had ever done anything like this before. We got together, we started with the goal of raising funds for a boat. We got European campaigns who'd already done it, who helped us buy a boat. We were joined by Australians, Belgians, and Danes. So we had the ABCD boat, the Australian, Belgian, Canadian, Danish boat for Gaza. We brought a whole bunch of people to Crete to sail to Gaza. We didn't sail from Crete in July of 2011, but we tried. The Greek authorities stopped us. We did sail in 2011, and that's where I can get this photo. So this group of people with 3 Canadians, an Australian, an American, and a Palestinian, were under the Palestinian flag sailing towards Gaza in November of 2011, when we, like other boats at that time, there was an Irish boat sailing with us, were stopped by the Israeli occupation military, kidnapped at sea, had our boat redirected towards the country which was not our destination, taken against our will to occupied Palestine, Israel, treated as illegal migrants, even though we said we were brought here against our will, and eventually, after being held for a few days, 6 days, were deported back to Canada. I say this not because I want to focus on that particular experience, but which has been repeated many, many times with different variants by different voyages of the Freedom Flotilla, but because we had the opportunity, and I say the honor, of sharing for a few days the fate of many thousands of Palestinians for many, many decades who suffer in the prisons of the apartheid state of Israel. And the importance is not that we were able to sail briefly towards Gaza. Its importance for me is the guy on the far left, Maj Kayal, a Palestinian from Haifa, who was able to stand at the helm of a boat, as he said, under a Palestinian flag, sailing to a part of Palestine which he couldn't travel to. He cannot travel to Gaza, even though it's like 100 kilometers from his home, but we were affirming his right to travel throughout Palestine, a right which is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to travel around your country, to leave and to return freely. So that's what it's all about, folks, is the right, the conscience of humanity here is the freedom of movement for Palestinians in Gaza and in all of occupied Palestine to travel freely in their country, to leave and to return, including all of the generations of exiles, of Palestinian refugees, to return freely to their country. That is the challenge of the Freedom Flotilla and the challenge of the conscience of humanity. Many other voyages through the last decade and a half. I'll quiz you at the end about the fine print, obviously. Canadian Boat to Gaza was particularly involved with 2013-14 Gaza's Ark, a project to sail out from Gaza, because they kept telling us that sailing into Gaza was a security threat. None of our boats pose a security threat to anybody. But sailing out from Gaza was going to bring trade goods produced by Palestinians out to the world. It was also after a year, almost 2 years of selling Palestinian products for export. People bought a certificate that they were going to get a kilo of dates or some embroidery, whether they were in Greece or Norway or South Africa or California. They bought it on the faith that they had to support the Palestinians of Gaza and their economy. The boat was eventually, during the aggression in 2014, was shelled and burned. Because, of course, the idea of free and fair trade for Palestinians to freely travel the Mediterranean outbound, beyond their own sea, is intolerable to the occupation as well. We were also involved in 2016 with the Women's Boat to Gaza. My friend Wendy Goldsmith, who was in an earlier photo, who's not here this evening, said to the Free Press in London, when asked, as we're always asked, aren't you afraid? Of course we're afraid, she said, but I'm more afraid of doing nothing, which remains true today. In 2017, we had a campaign of solidarity with Gaza fishers. In 2018, a Canadian was at the helm of one of the Freedom Flotilla boats, called Freedom, which sailed from Sweden all the way around to the Mediterranean, was intercepted, illegally detained and deported as well. There was a hiatus for reasons we all know from between 2019 and 2023, and then we picked up again in 2024 for the children of Gaza, the Handala, beginning in Northern Europe, ending up in the Mediterranean. And then I'm going to say the time when most of you perhaps began to pay attention to or notice or hear news of the flotillas, I want to say exploded, but I'm not really fond of explosive metaphors. It expanded greatly in the awareness of the world in 2025, when not only our voyage with the Madeleine earlier in the year, the Conscience, the same boat that sailed in the fall, sailed in May, was struck by Israeli drones. Madeleine sailed, Handala sailed, a whole bunch of boats sailed with the global Sumud flotilla and the 1,000 Madeleines, again in the fall. And we're not done yet. So this has been the busiest year yet for the flotilla, but it is, as our comrade said all those years ago in Cairo, it is a long haul. It is not something that we will win in this term or this person's undergraduate degree. People have sometimes said to me, I want Palestine to be free before I graduate. And I said, I hope you're a lifelong student. I hope you're going to be studying with us for a while. Not lifelong, it will happen in our lifetimes, but it's not something that we can hurry up. It is something we have to sustain for a long time. So we sustain ourselves. I mentioned dates a minute ago. We don't have the dates that were on board the Gaza's Ark for Gaza, but we do have Palestinian dates. So sustain yourself with wonderful Palestinian food, sustain yourself with beautiful Palestinian art and embroidery, books, music, all forms of art are things, Palestinian and people in support of Palestine are things that sustain us. They're things that sustain the struggle and keep us going in our daily lives as we continue what we're doing. Because not all of us are going to fit on a small boat in the Eastern Mediterranean. Even when we send dozens of boats, even when 3 different coalitions of flotilla boats send scores of boats to the Eastern Mediterranean, they tend to be very small boats. Here we were 6 plus media plus crew members. 12 in all was a lot at the time. I could have held more, but we weren't able to on this occasion. There is not going to be room in small boats in the Eastern Mediterranean for all the people who want to get on board. There is room on board this movement, and I'm going to speak broadly, the movement for a free Palestine, for all of us, for everybody who wants to be there. But we have to remember, why is it, I'm speaking about this through the Council of Canadians tonight, it's because of those linkages, because, think back to 2010, because we said water, and we still say water is a human right for everyone. So water is a human right for Palestinians in Gaza. Water and the defense of water is a human right also for Indigenous Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine, Indigenous nations of Turtle Island as well. So this connects to a campaign, and we've got some signs at the back that say defend democracy, repealing Bill 5. Bill 5 in Ontario, it's actually nasty. There's a Bill 5, C5, which is a Canadian bill, and Bill 5 in Ontario, which is a piece of Ontario legislation. Both of them threaten the UN declared right of free rights of Indigenous people, the right to free, prior and informed consent. This chapter of the Council of Canadians stands with, as Nora mentioned earlier, the Oneida First Nation of the Thames and other First Nations who are taking the Ontario government to court for it. you can show your support with one of those signs. We'll send them your donation. They're also looking for volunteers to coordinate the signs. They're in several small communities in Ontario. They don't currently have a sign coordinator in London. Our friends at Repeal Bill 5 would love to hear from you. When we defend Indigenous sovereignty and the Indigenous right to self-determination and free, prior, informed consent in Ontario and across Turtle Island, we are defending the same Indigenous rights that we demand for Palestinians in Gaza. It's not two separate struggles. They are the same struggle. And I will be very happy, well, we are already inviting Chief Cornelius of the Oneida Nation of the Thames to join us here in London if they choose to explain their court case here. We are very happy to give them a platform. And if they say, we want to see you at the front lines when we defend the land, I and others will be standing shoulder to shoulder with them. It's not only that. Thank you. So it's nasty legislation like that from governments, and it's no coincidence that the same governments that support the genocide and support the apartheid regime in occupied Palestine are the same governments who are violating Indigenous rights here in Turtle Island. It's not a coincidence. We have the same opponents, and we have to stand together against them, because people power, the power of the many, as the t-shirt says, the many against the money, or all of us against the billionaires, is the same struggle. In her recent report, Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, lists a large number of companies. I won't list them all here. I encourage you to go look at Albanese's report, also the report of the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker organization in the States, who talks about specifically about arms companies that are supporting the Israeli genocide against Palestinians. My point is, these companies are also among us. They are in our communities. They're here in London. They're not far from London. They're across Canada. When we oppose genocide there in Gaza, the Palestinians in Gaza, also genocide of Sudanese in Sudan and other places that are armed by Canadian military industries, we are also required to oppose those arms industries here in our communities. In addition, the same extractive industries which are exploiting Indigenous lands and despoiling Indigenous waters are the same ones who are pillaging Palestinian resources on the land and under the sea. So one of the things that we've been talking about for many years with the Freedom Flotilla is that Palestinians have the right to access their own sea. It shouldn't be controversial. Every other coastal people in the world can access their own sea. Palestinians cannot fish their own waters. They're the only coastal Indigenous people in the world who can't fish in their own waters with their own fishery, but they also can't access the resources that are under the sea. Israel is actively engaged in pumping gas out of the seabed on the sea of the Mediterranean off Gaza. One of the company that is at the core of it is Chevron International, which is also here in Canada. Chevron gas stations in Western Canada. Steph and I saw some of them in Alberta and BC. In Ontario, they go under the name Ultramar. So yes, you should individually be boycotting them, but we should also be acting politically against companies like Chevron. Chevron is already a bad, how shall I say, bad news. They're a despoiler of Indigenous lands from the Amazon to the Arctic, but they are also deeply complicit in the theft, the pillage, and the term is that, it's pillage of Indigenous resources that fuels apartheid, as this campaign from the BDS Secretariat names it. But this struggle is also here at home, so you don't have to. You could go find an Ultramar or a Chevron gas station to picket and leaflet, and that would be important. You can also find the arms trade here in London, and some of us were at this action last month here in London against the arms trade. The arms trade, the banner, one of the banners says war crimes start here. This is where the deals are made to sell the weapons that are used, shipped via, in many cases via the States, via the Emirates or other countries, to fuel war crimes, crimes against civilians in Sudan, but also in occupied Palestine. So when we try to shut it down here, when we say these industries have no place in our communities, we also demand for employees, whether they're unionized or not, we also demand better jobs that are industrial jobs, creating things that people need. And the quote that I had when this action was announced underlined the need to have a just green transition from war industries to industries like transit that our communities actually need and actually benefit society. So that is an ongoing part of the struggle, but it is also breaking.
The speaker is muted. The speaker is muted.
Still can't hear you.
Okay, thank you, Hino. How long have I been unmuted? How long was I muted, folks?
Just to the last minute.
Okay, thank you.
So let's just get this out of the way. I can't seem to get out that thing out of the way.
Doesn't matter, I'll look over there, it's fine.
No, but to get that thing in the middle up there.
Oh.
I don't know what that's doing. So,
You have to go right over there.
I don't know. Oh, there you go. Nice.
Then I'll come right back over here. Okay, sorry for the technical stuff. You wouldn't think that I've been teaching on Zoom and hybrid for half a decade, but it's true. But the technology is also always different. So we oppose the arms trade in our communities, not just because we oppose where those arms end up and what they end up killing, the people they end up killing, but also because we oppose an economy that depends on merchants of death. We support an economy which would have a just green transition towards industries which our communities actually need. Okay, this is where it gets messy. I have to come over here to advance the thing. Right. So in order to spread the good word, in order to understand the situation, we have to do a number of things. And people, we had a question in advance. Somebody submitted a question. Actually, my neighbor, I don't see him on screen here, but Galahindi is a neighbor in the community where Stephanie and I live. He lives here in London, in Kensington Village, but he's from, his family is from Oneida Nation of the Thames. And Galahindi asked, what can regular people do to bring an end to the genocide? And it's a big, oh, Galahindi is here. Hey, Galahindi, sorry, I couldn't see you on screen, which is a good sign. There's so many people on screen, I can't see you all. Glad you could join us, brother. There are so many, it's so large, right? It's this big consensus of political leaders and business leaders and the cheerleading corporate press. One very important thing, I mentioned reading Palestinian sources before. One very important thing is to read Palestinian sources. A big change in the last 15, 18 years since Castellet. At the time of Castellet, there were very few Palestinian voices getting out from Gaza. There are many now. There's a fire hose of different voices, bloggers and podcasters and journalists, citizen journalists, despite and perhaps because of the genocide, they're there live streaming it. It's unescapable, it's unavoidable. The news is out there. So follow their sources, read them and amplify them. If people ask you, why are you concerned about them? You don't have to say it's some abstraction that's in another place. You can say, I'm looking at this person's blog or this person's live stream or this person's podcast or all of them. And in terms of Canadian news, you want to follow, or Turtle Island news here in this part of the world. Okay, so you want to follow independent news sources, and I only had time to list a few. I didn't have access to all of my tech for the last couple of days, but I had some help. Thank you, Nora. We found, for example, Read Palestine from We Are Not Numbers, a very important partner of the Freedom Flotilla is this organization. It's not exclusively in Gaza, but most of the storytellers are in Gaza. Emerging writers, I always say aspiring and inspiring storytellers. Some of them by video, most of them in writing. And we mentor some of their writing because they're also students of the language, and we try to help them get broadcast and published and more widely disseminated. So disseminating their stories in all of their diversity, because one of the many lies that we hear in our media is, oh, Palestinians are all like this, or Palestinians are all like this. I find their writing, and I find the political spectrum and the philosophical spectrum and the artistic spectrum in Palestine breathtaking, broader than in many other countries I'm familiar with. So read and share stories from We Are Not Numbers. They're on all the platforms, also wearenotnumbers.org. And also Canadian media, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just favor a few, but The Breach or The Tyee or Rabble.ca are a few more, but you can look at Read the Maple, for example, or independents like Nora Loretto or Rachel Gilmore. Regional ones like the New Brunswick Media Co-op, or right here in London, the Antler River Media Co-op. They're not only covering the story from Gaza, but they are covering the genocide in a way that is relevant to our communities. They're interviewing people in our communities, but they're also talking about the truth about what's happening in other places that doesn't filter through, or barely filters through, the corporate media. So we have to look at other sources, and we have to share other sources. And when people say, how do you know? They say, because there's a citizen journalist from my city, from my campus, from my region, from my province, but we're also listening to the Palestinian voices directly out of Gaza, directly out of the rest of occupied Palestine. So we have to share these sources, and we have to say, these are the voices we need to listen to. They don't all agree, but that's okay. I don't need to agree with myself every day of the week. So it's not required that we are in complete lockstep or unison with every one of these voices. The Palestinians don't all agree with themselves. That's fine. The point is, they're talking about the destiny of their people in their territory. We ought to be listening to them and amplifying their voices, however we can and wherever we can. Because the course continues to be the conscience of humanity. So I showed you a photo earlier of 6 of us on the Tahrir in 2011. These 6 brave Canadians there are 6 of them, yes, were on the conscience in October. They were also kidnapped, taken to occupied Palestine against their will, held in much worse conditions than I enjoyed in 2011. Prison is never fun for anybody, but it's getting worse. They're trying to teach them a lesson. They were also deported back to Canada. They are also spreading their word. So the thing about when your course is the conscience of humanity is you can't turn back. You can change strategies, you can join other people, you can broaden the path and say, this is also part of the course towards the conscience of humanity. If we're struggling for freedom of movement for all, we're struggling for freedom of water for all, we're struggling for freedom from conflict for all, peace for every child, this is still sailing towards, marching towards, moving towards the conscience of humanity. So the short answer is, even when you're doing it in your community, and we have these signs for Glad Neighbors here as well from the Council of Canadians, when we stand against hate and white supremacy here in London, we are also calling on the better conscience of humanity. So we do that as the Council of Canadians, who has been distributing these for years. But we do that as a coalition of whoever in this city, in this region, show up in Victoria Park when the haters are there to say, no, this community refuses white supremacy and refuses hate and demands that we put hope over hate. So yeah, the punchline, nobody told me I'd be wearing a headset, just a second. So the punchline is, when you're on the course to break the siege, this is not sized right, you know what I mean. You are also with the many against the money. You are also with the billionaires against all of us, right? So this is the same struggle, folks. It isn't hidden underneath. The sleeves are actually there, and it's much more comfortable now. So you can take the signs from the Canadian Palestinian Social Association. Please look at their table. They have signs about Palestinian human rights. They also have beautiful calendars from Palestinian Resistant Arts, which are a fundraiser for People for Peace London, only $25. You want them this holiday season, and so does your family or friends. They have books. Remember the importance of educating ourselves and learning about Palestinian perspectives. They also do beautiful community artwork and other events. There is also a wonderful film festival at the end of the week, Friday the 28th and Saturday the 29th. featuring films about Turtle Island and Indigenous struggles here, but also films about occupied Palestine. Also a short film about my colleague, Dr. Tarek Lubani's stethoscope stories when he was in Gaza providing emergency medical care and also training for his colleagues. And also the premiere of the film about the encampments from a couple of summers ago, and Mahmoud Khalil in the encampments at Columbia. Brought to us, and this also brings me full loop, brought to the film festival due to the allyship and the support of the Latin American Canadian Solidarity Association. Shout out to Marie-France Arizmendi. The first solidarity organization I met when I moved to London let's say 28 years ago. Shortly after that, something happened in the world that reminded us that dictators don't go free forever. Augusto Pinochet was arrested in London, England. Unfortunately, due to the intervention of the oligarchies, he was eventually freed. But there was a group of people down at the old London Free Press offices yelling at the editorial masthead, come and listen to Londoners who know about Pinochet's dictatorship firsthand. You have to listen to those voices. They didn't listen to us, but we met the Arizmendis and other friends from La Casa. They're still here. They're sponsoring the film of the encampment on Saturday. So if you didn't have another reason, come and join us on Saturday for the the local premiere, let's put it that way, of the encampments film. As I said, I didn't have all the tech that I wanted to have to show, to make this presentation tonight, but I have a better excuse than saying my dog shut my computer off or ate my homework or something like that. Yesterday morning at 6 a.m., Stephanie and I were awoken by banging on the door with flashlights in my face as the London police raided our home and three other homes in different cities in Ontario, and seized all of our technology. This is a replacement phone. I'm using somebody else's computer. My computers, they had a warrant. I can read you the warrant. The warrant says they're to seize David Heap's computers, cell phone, digital media, memory sticks, and hard drives. It didn't say they could steal Stephanie Kelly's stuff as well, but they did. Cops do what cops are going to do. They took that. They charged me because I didn't invite them in. Apparently, I was guilty of alleged to have obstructed a police officer. Other people are facing much more serious charges. So again, this is not about us. What happened to us was perhaps outrageous, shocking. It's certainly a very rude way to begin your day. And it's a real hassle to not have the tech that I usually have when I had letters open. It's the time of year when we write letters for students to get admitted to programs and get scholarships. All of those letters are on a computer that I'm not going to see before scholarship season is done. But other people were arrested in their homes with small children. In some cases, they weren't arrested with their children. They're at home with small children who had to stay with their families as the parent was driven 4 hours across Ontario or driven from other cities in Ontario to be booked in London for the crime of, I'll go back here, for the crime of opposing the war trade. Okay, I won't read you because it'll take me too long to find it. The warrant is very clear. The period of time of interest that they're looking for files is from the 14th to the 28th of October, which straddles the date when we had this protest on the 21st of October. So it's very clear what they're looking for. They're trying to build a quote unquote conspiracy. If you can't see my air quotes, they're my air quotes, right? The supposed conspiracy to commit mischief, etc. They're not going to find any because the only conspiracy here is a conspiracy of hope that we can have a better community and a better economy that doesn't depend on the war trade. But even in their own terms, their warrant was a lie because it supposedly was to seize David Heap's computer and phone and other digital material. While I was outside cuffed in the back of a cruiser, they also picked up some items which were very clearly not digital media. This wreath is such a piece of a conspiracy. It's been on our front door almost 2 years now. So they didn't have to come and raid the house to pick it up. But it has apparently a message which signifies a future intent. That's what the police officer told Stephanie while I was outside. They also found, and I won't treat you to a picture of it, they found a similar message just below it. Sorry, there's a sign that says, Labor Against Palestine, Stop Arming Israel. They took that. paper sign, folks, also not digital media. They also took an unlaundered, slightly smelly t-shirt that has, you guessed it, a Palestinian flag, Falastin Hurra, Free Palestine on the front. This is also deposited in an evidence bag taken by London police as proof of future intent. So what we're doing here, folks, is not building evidence of a criminal conspiracy. What is happening here is that the police, in lockstep, I have to add, with Toronto Police and other forces, the same Canadian Border Service people who stopped Professor Falk and his spouse when they were coming to the tribunal in Ottawa, they're trying to criminalize opinion, political opinion, and they're trying to criminalize support for Palestinians. So I have a message for them, is if this is criminal intent, they better have very, very large prisons and a lot of cops, because this is the majority view of Canadians, and it is growing. It is growing, and it will become unstoppable, and that's ultimately what they're afraid of, that it's unstoppable. I also have a message that they left behind an evidence bag. It says London Police evidence bag, and something that fell off. You might notice in the corner of the wreath, there's a white. So this was a gift from a friend of ours. One of my colleagues gave me a white kite. The white kite is in memory of the words of our dear colleague, Rifat Al-Arir, one of the founders of We Are Not Numbers. Professor Al-Arir was a professor of literature and translation who was assassinated, targeted for assassination by the occupation forces. And before he died, he said, a poem that I won't repeat, but he said, if I should die, let it be a tale. Now, I don't think the tale should be Stephanie and David or Rachel and others in London or in Ontario. The tale is definitely the tale of Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians under occupation everywhere. But the tale continues. So my message to the London police is, I have your evidence bag. I have what you missed because you guys did not recognize the message. The message and the tale will continue. We will continue on the course towards the conscience of humanity. We will be joined by more and more, because the struggle for the conscience of humanity, sorry, you're not seeing it online, but you can guess. The struggle for the conscience of humanity towards the conscience of humanity is also the struggle of all of us against billionaires. It is the struggle of the many against the money. I am reminded, speaking of music, at the time of the G8, G20, our friend from London, not so much from London anymore, now from the East Coast, Testament, was rapping when hundreds of people were illegally detained. They were eventually freed and eventually got a settlement for the Toronto police. But at the time of the summit in Toronto, they were illegally detained, and Darius and the rest of Testament were rapping inside the prison, G8, G20, they few, we many. That's still true. They few, we many. Thank you very much. So it says here, Q&A. So I can moderate these questions, but it's probably simplest if I do. And then there's still treats at the back, so please have dates or pastries.
So if Zoom participants want to ask a question, they should put it in the chat.
Yes, Zoom participants can put their questions in the chat, and somebody will monitor them. I have that feeling that somebody is me, so let me figure out how to make the chat visible to me.
Maybe the laptop on this side, David?
So again? I can't see that one. Somebody else can look there if you can see the chat. Oh, Meg is monitoring. So Meg, yeah, so we don't need to. In the room, I saw a hand at the back there.
What are your views on the Canadian government's recent views about the genocide?
The Canadian government hasn't recognized the genocide. Prime Minister Carney avoided the word. He apologized and backtracked when he claimed to be embargoing arms in response to a question about the genocide, and he afterwards said, no, I didn't mean there was a genocide. They're avoiding the word. However, they have said that they are bound by decisions of the World Court, by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, and they will respect arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court for individuals implicated in genocide and other crimes against humanity. So they are, as usual, playing both sides of a very narrow street. We know that the vast majority of Canadians are on the side of justice and the side of human rights. We don't depend on states. We depend on people power to make it so. So when the people, as with, and Rod, you remember better than I do, we were both around at the time of apartheid 1.0. It wasn't political leaders who got us there. It was people's organizations, trade unions, faith groups, community groups, peace groups, student groups on campuses that led the way. Eventually politicians followed, and finally governments followed. So when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And that's true of the Canadian government as well. Okay. There's tons of chat here, as it turns out. Sorry, Peter, I didn't see it in time. Sorry, I'm moving to the other one. Galahindi wants to know why there's such an issue for leaders to use the term genocide. What is happening is the very definition of, it's a definition for you and me, Galahindi, and I'm going to say for most of the people in the room or the Zoom room or the physical room. Political leaders don't want to be associated with it because they know, even though they claim to have an arms embargo, it's a fraud. It's not a real arms embargo, and they don't want to admit that they are arming a genocide in Gaza, or for that matter in Sudan, because Canadian arms are there as well. So the issue is they don't want to be caught doing what we know that they're doing. They don't want to be visible doing what they know we're doing. We know that they're doing. So we have to continue pointing it out, and we have to demand justice for Sudan and also for Palestinians of Gaza. I've got one at the back and then John up here. Yes.
David, thank you for all that you're doing. There's a report about a week ago about the Canadian Army military over there in Israel. Can you comment on that, please?
So the question was about the Canadian military training in Israel. Sorry, yeah, I need to repeat questions for folks online. Shocking but not, or horrifying but not surprising. I'm not sure what the brief comment would be. We're not that surprised because we know that the Canadian military supports the settler colonial state here and abroad. The Canadian military, like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, was originally designed for imperial purposes within Canada, to occupy Indigenous land in Canada and to promote the British Empire abroad. And with very, very few exceptions, if any, that is what the history of the Canadian military is all about. And it's not surprising then, it's shameful, and it has to be publicly called out. But it's not that surprising that they are also training with the Israeli occupation military, who all deserve to be called to the accused dock in The Hague for crimes against humanity. Both the enlisted soldiers, but especially the officers and the commanders. So the fact that we're training there is very shameful, as I said, and it's also ultimately worrisome because it's an indication of the type of deployment that our quote-unquote leaders see as relevant for the Canadian forces that we all pay for. But it's part of the military buildup, and I think we should pause as well to say that when we're against the billionaires, we're also against the billionaires' budget, the current federal budget, which privileges military spending and military buildup over human needs, over hospitals, over schools, over community needs, over universities and colleges. That is also part of what we have to oppose. So when we oppose the billionaires and we oppose the genocide, we also oppose the billionaires' budget, because that's the budget that says, hey, these folks need to be trained with the genocidaire in Israel. John and then Medea.
David, do you have a lawyer? And
We're well looked after.
has the media been made aware of what transpired?
Well, the London police put out a press release this afternoon, updating their press release from the 21st of October, saying that a bunch of people had been apprehended and homes raided in London and other municipalities in Ontario. And I was called shortly thereafter by the CBC for my comment on it. So yes, the media are apprised, and I had another contact from a journalist after that. So the media have been made aware of it. We are raising funds for a defense fund. I have counsel here in London. We are also very interested in a collective defense for the 5 people at this point who have been charged from different places in Ontario. There might be more. So there is, and I'm sorry I haven't got the link here, but there is through Surge Standing Up for Racial Justice Toronto, there is a fund for legal defense for all of the people involved. I'm not terribly worried about our own defense. I think the charge of obstruct, the allegations of obstruct in my case are not something I'm terribly worried about. I am more concerned about this generalized hysteria around a criminal conspiracy. This is what was used to criminalize almost a dozen people in Toronto for putting up posters at a bookstore that supports genocide, and none of those charges stood up in the end. There were no criminal convictions as a result. So I think Murillo is going to give me the, you expect I can read this on your phone, dude, that's the problem.
tinyurl.com, you read it just now, go ahead.
tinyurl.com/legal defense?
Yeah. Legal.
London Legal Defense.
Yeah, London Legal Defense. So
London Legal-
tinyurl.com/London Legal Defense.
Okay. Somebody smarter than me, or will, tiny, yeah, and I can't type. Tiny,
tinyurl.com/London Legal Defense.
defense with an S? Somebody tell me. Like that? Defense with an S, Murillo?
HTTP, tinyurl.com, London Legal Donation
Donation.
is the first one. My credit card, e-transfer, London Legal Donation at gmail.com. So it's London Legal Donation, either tinyurl.
I've put it in the chat already.
Oh, thank you, Marlene. Sorry, I'm slow on the uptake here. Thanks, Marlene, for putting it in the chat. Two ways to donate: by e-transfer or by credit card. And it is, again, it says London because the allegations begin in London, but there are people involved from at least 4 other municipalities in Ontario. And we are looking at a collective defense of all of us. And I repeat, it is not defense for a quote-unquote criminal conspiracy, though those may crop up in the charges, or mischief, or any of the rest of it. It is defense of political dissent and defense of the right to have an opinion about a free Palestine and about a world free of arms trades. Sorry, that was John. Mireya? Sorry, I had a question at the end, Mireya. Yeah, Mireya, please go ahead.
Yes, my question is related to the Canadian military training in Israel. There are also people, young people here, Canadian young people, who are going to be part of the army in Israel. And I wonder what's the connection between the military going there and young people here volunteering to be part of the Israeli military.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing to do there is to track those people. And again, I didn't get all the media on the presentation here, but a very important source for that, Read the Maple. Read Maple in Canada tracked the public profiles, not doxing anybody's private information, simply the public profiles of Canadians who proudly announced that they were volunteering to take part in the genocide, in the Israeli occupation military. And so this is public information that we have to demand that the Canadian government treat as prima facie as likely guilty of war crimes, and they need to be treated very seriously as likely guilty of war crimes. The Canadian government, of course, is slow to do that. It's not immovable. A few years ago, the Canadian government looked like it would never get around to decertifying charities that support the Israeli military and support the occupation of the West Bank. It turns out now they're at 2 or 3 counting charities which have been decertified as charities. So this is very possible with sufficient public pressure. But it begins by naming them, documenting them, and shaming them. Thank you. Sorry, there was a question here on the...
How did you go about organizing all of this?
all of which I've talked about. From 2010 or from October this year?
How did you organize the first one, your first sale?
The first sale, we had a steering group. We still have a steering group from across the country of folks who reached out to civil society and raised funds, raised awareness, and raised hell. That's the simple formula, and I don't mean to be glib about it, but that's what it is. It's folks meeting and spreading the word about the true conditions about Gaza. And again, 15 years ago, there was much less information in circulation. So getting the information out there, doing that work, which is speaking, and this is something we can all do, whether you're involved in the flotilla or the anti-arms trade or another aspect of this very multifaceted struggle against the billionaires, have those conversations in your workplace with your classmates, with your workmates, with your neighbors. I always say with strangers on the bus. Maybe you don't have those conversations with strangers on the bus. Sometimes I do. Walking at the market, wherever. It's not easy. It's not easy to bring it up with your neighbors. One of the people who sailed with us in 2011 and 2015 Bob said, it's easy for you, David, to go to campus or a union hall and talk with a largely sympathetic audience. It's really tough to talk to your neighbors. They may have all kinds of views. You're not going to move everybody over to saying, yes, we support the liberation of Palestine and the, free Gaza tomorrow. But we have to start those difficult conversations and say, as I said, in your workplace, in the place where you're studying, in the place where you live, in your faith groups or your community groups. If you're like me and you don't have any particular religious faiths, I would encourage you to support faith groups or ethnically based groups which are speaking out. You had cards on your seat when you came in for Independent Jewish Voices. When we toured after the 2011 flotilla, that tour was sponsored, not surprisingly perhaps, by Canadian Arab Federation, by the Council of Canadians, by the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, the first national union in Canada to support boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and by Independent Jewish Voices. So Independent Jewish Voices now for almost 2 decades, so certainly more than a decade and a half, has been supporting universal human rights for Palestinians. There's a chapter now here in London. I don't support them out of faith. Some people are involved who are for religious faith, other people because they identify as Jews. The point is, they are bringing the truth against the lie that somehow the state of Israel is a good idea for Jews. What they tell us is it's a terrible idea for Jews, as well as for Palestinians, as well as for universal human rights. So supporting Independent Jewish Voices or another group within your workplace, within the place where you study, within the place where you live, within your community, somehow, you will find that there are others who share your point of view and others who need to be educated and you need to have conversations with them, find the resources, find the readings, find the videos and podcasts, learn the arguments that will count for the people around you. There's no magic formula. It's ultimately those conversations that make the difference. It can lead then to a resolution. This association, this union, this whatever supports the flotilla against the blockade of Gaza, or supports an end to the arms trade, supports right now, I would center the argument or the discussion, if I had to, around arms embargo now. A full bi-directional arms embargo from Canada to the apartheid state of Israel is the issue of our time. We cannot stop the conflict directly. We can stop Canada arming it and supplying it. And that means stop selling stuff directly or indirectly through the loopholes in the States. So the current bill in Parliament, the No Loopholes Bill, No More Loopholes Bill, is an important part of that, but also procurement. The Canadian military is not just sending soldiers to train with the Israeli military. They're buying from the Israeli military complex Elbit drones. Why we need military drones is beyond me, but if we're going to buy military drones, we shouldn't be buying them from a company that is bankrolling genocide. So those aren't easy conversations, but those are the necessary conversations we have to have everywhere throughout the country. Thank you. Oh, in the chat. Galahindi again. So I'm reading from, say again?
Susan Scott Mallon has had a question for a while.
Okay, Susan, do you want to type it, Susan, or do you want to raise your hand?
It's in the chat.
I've seen Galahindi in the hat. Is hers above Galahindi? Sorry, I'll go over here. Scroll back. Do you want to?
Would you like me to read it out?
Yeah.
You're not going to be heard online. So Susan's okay. Do you think there will ever be a worldwide accepted Palestinian state? I hope so, but for many decades it's never happened. That is measurable, Susan. So it's closer now than it has ever been to recognition. So I'm not worried about the recognition of the Palestinian state. The big sticking point, of course, is the veto on the Security Council by the US. I think when the US comes around, the others on the Security Council and the rest of the UN will come around. But it took the US a long time to recognize the necessity of change in Southern Africa. And when it happened very quickly, right? So I'm not going to say we're close, because I don't want people to hold their breath. I want people to take a deep breath and put their shoulders to the struggle and push hard for it at all levels. I think Canada coming around, unfortunately, recognizing the state was not recognizing justice for Palestinians. So the recognition by the Canadian state is still not enough. You can't recognize a state and then also arm the people who are running a genocide against the Palestinian people. So the hypocrisy of the Canadian state should come as no surprise to us. We need to say, that's nice, now make it mean something, now have a full two-way embargo. So I'll jump to the bottom recognition of a state with no people. How do we get updated, authentic information about what's currently happening in Gaza and the West Bank? The other issue is that Western media is blocked from entering Gaza, not just Western media, all international media are blocked from entering Gaza. This is how you know, incidentally, that a genocidal power or an occupation or an apartheid regime knows that they're committing crimes, because they don't want international eyes on it. The first thing that happened, recently this year, our flotilla boats have had live stream cameras on them. But in 2010, 2012, 2011, they would block all the signals, the satellite signals, before they boarded, because they didn't want the world to see what they're about to do. So this is basically an admission of guilt. They also they do their best to steal footage from journalists who are on board these ships. Some gets out, but they do their best to suppress the story, because they want to control, the occupation wants to control the narrative. The truth seeps out. And there is more truth now than ever before. Unfortunately, it's not a simple answer, Galahindi. We need to look at all of the different varied sources I was looking at. I would add international sources. There's no one source which is perfect. Al Jazeera is very good, but on their hand, they also have areas where they're not so good. Some of the other international media from the Global South is very good on some issues and not on others. The broad spectrum of Canadian independent media, I think if you're consuming several different media, and they aren't corporate media, you're probably well on the road to a fuller, broader, more nuanced understanding. I would say we must, say again? Zeteo is also very good on these issues. We must say yes, it will happen, because when we start doubting it, we'll lose our footing in opinion. Consortium News, a suggestion from online from a colleague as well. So there are many alternate news sources, Mondo Vice, etc., that we should be looking at on this issue and on others. Because when you look at Read the Maple, for example, you'll see the links to other issues across Turtle Island, right? So the struggle against the billionaires is the struggle for the conscience of humanity and for the liberation of Palestine and for an end to the blockade. But it is also a struggle against the oil companies and the arms manufacturers in this country. So seeing the whole, and it's the struggle for labor rights and the struggle for indigenous rights. So you see the whole picture when you consume more of the alternative media across Canada, across Turtle Island. Your hand went up again and then down again.
I want to ask, but I don't know how it also sounds somewhat defeatist. But Israel as a state is like a Western power enacting an act of colonization. What I'm worried about is that places like Canada and the United States will find themselves unable to recognize Palestine as a state again, because that will unravel their own history. So I don't know what to do and how to start a conversation about that.
Well, no, it's a fair comment. So the question is, can we hope that the Canadian state will recognize a free Palestine if they're also complicit in, would lead to the unraveling of the Canadian state power? Absolutely. Settler colonialist powers stand together. And the apartheid that we see in Israel is in fact indirectly or directly a descendant of the past law and the apartheid initiated against First Peoples in North America, in Turtle Island, perfected a little bit more in South Africa, and then perfected even more in the Bantustans of occupied Palestine. So absolutely, a recognition of Palestinian rights will be a threat to colonial power in Canada. That's not a bad thing. It's a tough thing, but it's not a bad thing. So we'll include those tough conversations Here, when we say, yes, when people say, well, if you have rights for them, then what does that mean here? Well, yeah, it actually does mean land back here as well. It means that at least starting with the vast tracts of this country, which are called quote unquote crown land, we should be doing what happened in Haida Gwaii and handing title back to the First Nations. And then the negotiation is, okay, how does a settler population co-manage, because we're here as well for over many generations, how do we co-manage these riches and these resources, recognizing the first rights of the first people? So yeah, it's a tough conversation. But I'm not depending on the Canadian government. We're going to move the Canadian government because we're going to move people who live on Turtle Island. The people will lead, the leaders will follow.
How do you have like a way to talk to people in Canada to make them more likely to recognize Palestine? Do you have a way to do that?
There's not so is there a way to make people in Canada recognize the rights of Palestinians? There isn't one way. It's all of these conversations. And I'm going to say we're going to move to another question and maybe wrap up. I see somebody else online from the Council of Canadians. But sometimes the conversation is about Palestine. It's about Gaza. It's about that genocide. Sometimes it's about the resource extraction and the oil companies. Sometimes it's about the arms companies. Sometimes it's about the media conglomerates. Sometimes it's about the fact that those same media conglomerates are also participating in the violation of Indigenous rights in Canada. It's many different conversations, and different ones will resonate with different people. It begins when we start saying, again, to our neighbors, our workmates, our classmates, people in our community, this is unjust, we can do something about it. And there are many, many conversations. There isn't one magic formula, otherwise we would already be there. Sorry. I'm going to try to read a comment here. There's a comment from Trish Coxegg, who is with Council of Canadians in Powell River, the Cothet chapter of Council of Canadians, with a strong peace and ceasefire group, which has been meeting every week since October 2023. Strength is in numbers. We will find different ways to support Gaza and other peoples being destroyed by the military-industrial complex. So more of a comment than a question. Types of actions, the Council of Canadians should, this is a question from Diwa Marcelino, who is currently acting chair of the National Board of Council of Canadians. I forgot to mention this earlier. In addition to all of her other duties, Nora, who we saw earlier, is regional representative on the National Board of the Council of Canadians, helped advance, among other things, the Madeleine Declaration earlier this year. If you don't know, look up the Madeleine Declaration. I think it's still open for signatures by individuals and groups. It links explicitly the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean, the migrant crisis, which is really a racist, exclusionary European policy, with the climate crisis, with the occupation of Palestine, and say we have to address those three together. So thank you to Nora for promoting that at the Council of Canadians National Board. And over to Diwa here, what types of action should the Council of Canadians take to build Palestinian solidarity, to increase pressure on the Canadian government and institutions who are still actively and passively supporting Israeli apartheid? The Council of Canadians does a number of things well. One of them is working in coalition. So we work in coalition here, as was described in our activity report, with, for example, the local Labour Council, the Labour movement. That's a very important area, among other things, for education. Not enough Canadians know about the issues, and I've had the pleasure of being invited, the honor of being invited by different locals and regional councils of various unions in the region to talk to their members at the grassroots level. And it's surprising the conversations you can have. Not everybody is open to hearing about Palestinian rights initially. When you put it in the framework of universal human rights for people here and everywhere, as well as in Palestine, as I say, it begins an interesting conversation. So I think the Council of Canadians has an important educational role to play, and it has an important ally coalition building role to play. I think both of those are key efforts, and carrying forward, the Council of Canadians is a member of the Arms Embargo Now coalition, so helping spread the word about action and education on the No Loopholes bill right now in the Canadian Parliament is something that the Council of Canadians should be doing in terms of the government actively and passively supporting Israeli apartheid and the arms industry more generally. Thanks for the question, Diwa. And Thanks for the comments. Roberta?
Do you have another question?
I'm just reading, the questions are now comments online. We're good.
Okay, I just wanted to say that, I live in Wortley Village. I live in a tidy, everybody's landscape kind of neighborhood. And I use my front yard to put signs in because I'm trying to wear my values on the outside. And I think there's a climate of fear. I just feel a climate of fear. There certainly is a neighborhood. I would go around with signs and people say, oh, I don't know, it just kind of messes up the landscaping, it isn't pretty. Or they would say, oh, I don't know, I don't want to get into trouble with my neighbors. Let's everybody just get along and let's avoid politics. No, we have to use our voices. So I'm using any space, any privilege, any platform I've got. So that's why I think you can wear t-shirts, but also put all the signs that are your values either in your window, facing the street, or, be brazen, just stick them, plunk them right into your garden. So what if it's Christmas or, whatever, you've got twinkle lights on, big deal. Put your signs out there too. So we can write it down. I'm 193 Duchess Avenue, and I keep the signs on my big front porch. And so all you have to do is just come and get a sign off my porch and take it. You don't have to ring my doorbell, you don't have to ask for a sign. I'm willing to take the Defend Democracy signs. I've also got signs for Don't Privatize Healthcare. Jeff Hanks' signs are there, and I can't even remember what else. But anyway, it's just a place where you can come whisk by, pick up your sign and get it out there. The more people that do it, the less scared your neighbors are to say something.
Roberta says, wear your signs, wear your values where they're visible outside your home or in your window. She has some on offer at her place in Old South on 193 Duchess?
193 Duchess.
Right.
Yeah.
Both the Glad Neighbors one, which was in the presentation, also the ones here today about Repeal Bill 5 and preserving healthcare signs.
And don't privatize healthcare.
Yeah, preserving healthcare from privatization. But if this is a dangerous message, if Free Palestine on a wreath is a dangerous message that needs to be collected for evidence, the answer is absolutely strength in numbers. A few people can be intimidated. There was a time when students told me on campus they were happy to see a faculty member wearing a keffiyeh because they didn't think that non-Arabs wore keffiyehs. I wish those same students could come back today and see how many different people, faculty, students, staff, and others in the community and on campus are wearing the keffiyeh. They would not feel as lonely today as they did some decades ago. This is definitely the cause of our times, and it's a cause which will only continue to gather momentum. The question is when the powers that be, when our so-called political leaders will get on board with us. If you live in a place, so question from Marlene online, she lives in a condo with rules putting signs and flags up. They can't control what you wear, so you can wear the t-shirt. Not everybody is comfortable wearing the keffiyeh or the button. I always tell people, if it's not about the merch, it's not about what you're wearing, it's what you're carrying in your mind and in your tongue and in your heart. So if you have Palestine in your heart and in your mind and on your tongue, you will find an occasion. For me, the keffiyeh is a conversation starter. I've started conversations, some of them more difficult, some of them more easy, with people I know and with people I don't know. But even when we don't, even if we're not wearing a t-shirt or a button or a keffiyeh or something and there's no sign in our house, we can start that conversation with somebody who say, hey, have you read this story about these children in Gaza or these colleagues, teachers, healthcare workers, community people like us, in Palestinians in Gaza and what they're facing? Just start those conversations. You don't need a special tool. It's nice to have the leaflet or the poem or the book or the pamphlet, but you don't need that. You need, maybe invite them to a podcast, invite them to an educational event if you don't have all the words yourself. Make up the event and get people talking. That's whether you're wearing your values in a sign that you can make visible in the place where you live or not. Maybe you don't feel safe doing that. find somebody to start the conversation with and have one more conversation this week than you did last week. Chava.
Not only are humans wearing keffiyehs, even cats are wearing them. I just got this calendar, Cats in Keffiyehs, which is produced by the Universal Limbs Foundation. It creates prosthetics for people living in conflict, so.
Yeah.
If any of you don't have a keffiyeh, people over there.
Yes, you can get keffiyehs here this evening. If not, contact Canadian Palestinian Social Association in London or an organization near you. Galahindi, we got you covered. You're our neighbor and brother. And absolutely, cats and keffiyehs. Universal Limbs had prosthetic limbs, 3D printed prosthetic limbs from Ontario on board some of the flotilla ships this year. They were also stolen by the Israeli military and never delivered. But the point is, we will continue printing them. The civil society will continue printing them. We'll continue shipping them to civil society, to medical professionals in Gaza, and the brave medical professionals who continue to provide medical care where it's most needed, despite knowing that they are among the most targeted. So, I mean, the bottom line for me is that this struggle, the many against the billionaires, we can break the blockade when we have a strong civil society in our trade unions, in our professional associations, in our student organizations, everywhere, in our neighborhood associations. It's a strong civil society that will eventually turn around our cowardly, spineless governments that don't intervene when racists hang a banner on Wortley Bridge, but they come knocking on the doors of people who call for a free Palestine. That we can turn around with a strong civil society, with friends and neighbors, workmates and classmates. Thank you. I want to please. Can you pass it, please? So there's lots of information here. We don't have to be out of the room for a bit. We're getting a waved hand from Selma.
Yeah, just a small comment, commenting on the cat. Last protest we had last Sunday, one of the people that were at the protest was asking if they could get a keffiyeh for the dog. So I said, when I travel back to the Middle East, I'm going to bring more of those so that the dogs could also wear them. And also on another note, I think it's important for us also to support the initiatives that are happening also in our communities. For example, there's the Bill C9, and we need to act against that. There's going to be a press conference next week, I think Wednesday around 4 o'clock. So we'll send out more information from CPSA about that. It's by the CM PAC, and it's us staying against Bill C9, which really restricts our freedom of speech in Canada. So that's also coming up, and it's important for us to mention that as well.
There's lots of time to look at the material that's here, pick up the signs or other things that might be of interest. Thank you. And have the snacks.
Do you want to say goodbye to the Zoom or should I?
I'm not seeing more from the Zoom, so we'll say goodnight to the folks in the Zoom as well. Thank you for joining us from wherever you joined us from. I see there's people from different parts of Turtle Island. Thank you.